Good morning. I'm Dr. Frances Yahia, and I wanted to share with you my spiritual adulting archetype map. So all of these are the archetypes found in your astrology chart, and we'll go to a sample chart in a bit. But first, let's talk about the language of the universe. The language of the universe is archetypal, symbolic, mythological. That's why all of the sacred texts are written in metaphor and symbol. So if we understand archetypes, we can understand our psyche and the universe. So what I've done is I've categorized the archetypes in order of your spiritual growth and your spiritual growth path. So we'll get to the wounded ruler archetype in a moment. But first, let's start with my map that I use in my models as child, teenager, adult, and spiritual adult. So let's define these. You are in child when you're seeking subconsciously mother or father to meet your needs or to love you unconditionally. This can never happen. They never did it. It's not their job. So what I say is you show up as a child, oftentimes manipulative like the moon, or rational and logical, trying to get someone to meet your needs. So this is not that the solar aspect is bad. This is simply from a subconscious archetypal perspective that we can also see in the chart. So just from the astrology point of view, the sun and the moon are going to be part of the subconscious programming. The ascendant is the choice to raise the vibration around the sun and the moon that you received at conception, pregnancy, birth, and then 0 to 7. So that isn't like a bad thing, the sun. On the contrary, it's what we want to achieve is our solar energy. But we tend to get stuck in this part of our life, which is the child script. Next is Mars and Mercury. So Mercury is the trickster. It's the low-level conscious that we're given attached to our body, linked to conception. So now we have mom and dad at conception, the low-level consciousness. As a result of having flawed thoughts given to mom and dad, us seeking others to meet our needs, to reaffirm that we're enough, even though mom and dad kicked us out of Olympus and we're here trying to make our way in the world, then we put on a veil, which creates our ego, which is Mars. We hide our wound. We show up in the world uber ambitious, athletic, however it is that you manifest, showing up the hiding of the wound, which is your veil, and you stay in child. So if you're at this archetypal level, and this is your story, and this is where most people stay. Most people are constantly, in my shaman program, I called it the unchangeable nature or the West. You're staying attached to limiting thoughts, limiting beliefs that are attached to a low-level consciousness that is attached to an emotional response from pregnancy and is attached to a desire, one of the deadly sins that you have yet to accept that you cannot change. This is your unchangeable nature. As a result, you wear a veil, you hide the wound, and you show up with your ego, which makes you feel separate from others. So the spiritual path really starts when we understand that our ego and our personality tied up in Mars is actually covering up the divine will and the purpose. Same archetype. The circle of spirit with the arrow is directed. But if you're directing it in a child way, looking back, trying to get mom to meet your needs and dad's unconditional love, then you're in the vicious cycle. And this is where most people spend most of their life. And we can move into teenager. Now, teenager takes a bit of Mercury because you're going to breathe. So you're going to take a breath. You're going to think about your value systems, which is Venus. And this is going to raise consciousness or allow you to have stronger fire, which is Jupiter, Sagittarius, and make a better choice that is not looking for someone else to meet your needs, but you meeting your own needs. So now we're on the way to adult. Adult is when we set limits, boundaries. What I tell clients is based on your value system here, you start creating definable, observable, measurable goals or value systems, no matter what, with some structure. It's a rule book or a philosophy of life. This then gives you freedom. Freedom is a state of mind. Freedom is linked to knowing your values, to not self-betraying. It has absolutely nothing to do with having a lot of money or no boss. The way we get freedom in our psyche is linked to having values, boundaries, a rule book, and a philosophy of life that we live by. Therefore, we don't self-betray. So here we start some self-love with Venus linked to values. Here we're starting to choose our spiritual growth. Anytime you see a curvature like this, it is related to spiritual growth. Spiritual growth is cyclical and spherical. No matter what tradition you follow, shamanism, the medicine wheel, alchemy, the 4 steps of alchemy, the seasons, if you're more in terms of nature and the solstices. If you follow astrology, it's a wheel. You will see repeated in every tradition that it is represented as a circle. It has a cycle. The spiritual path has a cycle. Therefore, if you do that cycle, then spherical refers to how much spiritual growth you will have. You choose that. That's linked to the sacred geometry, to the Fibonacci code in nature, the phi number, the Enneagram numbers in our numerology. So the earth has a universe, has implanted in the earth a spiritual growth number. So the number is there for your taking, kind of like Jupiter, but you have to participate in the growth. So the cycles are going to constantly be coming. You decide, do you want to be a little raisin, or do you want to grow like a big jackfruit on your spiritual growth tree? And that is your free will and your choice. So when you start seeing these curvatures, we're talking about growth and ascension. Then we have to put limits and boundaries. Then we start to feel free, because like I said, it is a state of mind. Most people, if they manage to get out of child, covering their wound, overworking, more money, more status, whatever their nonsense is to cover their ego, if they manage for a moment to get out of that, the next place we get stuck is here. Limits, freedom, safety, freedom. This is the age-old fight of the universe. Uranus was castrated. This circle was his testicle by his son Saturn. This is where most people and where the world is today. We're having this age-old mythological fight between safety, limits, and freedom. This is happening in our head. So this shows how the state of the world is up here. Then we have Neptune. Neptune is a nebulous planet, but in the spiritual adulting chart, it comes after Uranus, because now we're seeking a spiritual path. Now we're choosing something beyond ourselves. In the myth of Zeus birthing Athena, Zeus births Athena and he needs Hephaestos' help. Hephaestos represents imagination, spirituality, something beyond ourselves. So this is necessary. The thing is that most people live this out in a low-level consciousness, and they're actually seeking a savior, that the spiritual path or an ashram or a retreat is going to save them. If you stay in magical thinking, your Pluto is going to be worse. But if you actually own a spiritual path and you actually live by the steps of it, then Pluto comes in. Pluto assigns you 50% of spiritual consciousness, 50% of material consciousness, what I call spiritual wins or processes or material wins and outcomes. Now you start living. You have your spiritual path, you have your faith. Maybe sometimes you go back to child, maybe sometimes you're in victim, like Neptune is. That's okay, we're human. But then from that experience, we can extract the spiritual lesson, get out of the story that keeps us sort of tied up, and see our creation in it. This starts to remove more and more of the veils. So Pluto doesn't have to be uber destructive if we can understand that we have to give, like Jesus said, give God's what is God's, give Caesar's what is Caesar's, give the body and the earthly world what it needs, and give your spiritual and your soul and your higher consciousness what it needs. Then we enter what is spiritual adulting. This is the key. Now here, from what needs we wanted met, from our wound, we no longer, not that we don't ever get rid of our ego. We never get rid of our ego, and we never get rid of our personality. But now the divine will, the purpose is leading the show. So that's the masculine or the Mars energy. And Chiron here represents owning the wound. And I like to tell people, what you admire in another person is exactly the wound that they're trying to cover for you to not see. So what is it that you want people to meet your needs through? What is it that you throw at a problem? Is it money? Is it sex? Is it comedy? That gift that you're trying to hide that wound with is actually the wound that you need to uncover to yourself. Your choice if you tell others. But clean out that wound, because that wound is actually what's going to lead you to your Lilith or Black Moon archetype. This is the ruler archetype. Chiron is the wound or the everyday man. I am not a believer in the wounded warrior. The wounded warrior is a cop-out. The wounded warrior is the low vibration of the centaur. I have a wound. I will ignore mine. I will focus on yours, help you heal yours, but yet I won't apply the same antidote or medicine to my own. Spirituality doesn't work that way. So I don't like that archetype. So I've renamed this to the wounded ruler. When you own your wound and you recognize a wound that will never heal, as per the myth of Chiron in this lifetime, until you die, and know that that is linked to your self-worth, not getting your needs met in childhood, not unconditional love, not knowing your values, self-betraying, all the reasons that you have this wound that actually came from the moment of conception, because that's when you were literally kicked out of Olympus or the Garden of Eden or heaven in the universal consciousness, whichever term you like. Then you also start to recognize that you're just an everyday man, that you have a wound, one, like everybody else, woven into every part of your story, and you don't have to hide it anymore. This doesn't mean that the ego is gone or the personality, it's still there driving some force, but you're now knowing that when you respond that way, you're responding to either cover up the wound or own the wound and recognize that these are your sins, these are your passions, they can't get rid of. So you kneel and you recognize that, oh, I am just human and I have to sort of surrender to this. This can lead you to what I call your spiritual striptease, which is with Lilith. This is when you get really down and dirty with your shadow. So this is normally like truth 8 of a spiritual path, but it's one that you continue to truth 12 every single day, looking at your shadow. So here it starts with a child. I am a believer that we are a child of no one. The church used the term a child of God to keep us stuck. We are a child of no one. The universe does not have your back. And Lilith is proof of that. Lilith told God, no, I will not do what you asked me to do with Adam, which was let him be on top. And so she was exiled, swallowed her children, swallowed men, and all of the nonsense linked to this being a devil archetype is ridiculous. This is the part of us where we control our life, where we make choices, we take responsibility. If I show up for myself, the universe doesn't have my back. It has my back when I have my own back. It responds to me having my own back. When I decide to go into exile because I use overt power and don't agree with something, that's okay. I take the consequences. Just like I decide to quiet and use covert power and sit back and just let things unfold. But I am taking responsibility. And this is the archetype, the spiritual adulting archetype, the wounded ruler that we really want to own. It shows us that we are human and flawed, but also divine. Now, this does not mean that there isn't some mystery or some force in the universe. We're not God per se, or the universe, all of it. I like to equate this to a cookie dough. The universal cookie dough is the whole big Nestle sort of roll. You are one plop of that cookie dough. So that cookie dough is your divine essence. And that's what this is. In the astrology chart, the point where you have a Lilith by sign and by house is where you will self-destruct and hate yourself. It will be your biggest point of pain and suffering until you learn to love and accept her, tame her, and then use her to your advantage. Then the last part of spiritual adulting, the clincher, is to come back to Venus. This is self-love, loving thy neighbor. This is love thy neighbor as thyself. Once you have removed all of your veils, you know exactly your values, you know your philosophy, you know your rule book, then all that is left is returning back to Venus or Aphrodite, which is love. The teenager Venus is Aphrodite Pandemos. That is the second chakra that has to do with sex and money and pleasures and desires. That is the lower level consciousness. There's nothing wrong with that. We need that to accept that we're human and that we have sins that we have to uncover. There's nothing wrong with that. But when we come back to it to clinch up the spiritual adulting map through the archetypes, we're now in Aphrodite, Uranus, Urania. It comes from the heart chakra. Now we can love others because we have loved ourselves, third chakra, despite having a second chakra, which is passions and desire. So let me just share with you a chart. And we will look at this. So wow, this person has a huge stellium in the 6th. So their sun is in Aquarius and their moon is in Gemini. So this is where they would kind of live. It's a trine, so lucky them. This is where they would kind of live at that low level consciousness, earthly, seeking parental needs, mainly through the moon. The moon is really where we seek others to meet our needs. This is Gemini in the 10th house. And this is where people, where we kind of stay in the child archetype. There are times that we can use our logical mind and we can identify certain things, but we tend to slip back right into the moon. So the 6th chakra has 2 lotus petals, one that's a moon and one that's a sun, representing our parents are always in our head. They're always in our ear, as they should be. They're the ones that gave us the vibration, the limiting beliefs. But our 3rd chakra, our 6th chakra, is called a void. That's our throne. If we don't spiritual adult, our parents will stay in charge of our kingdom and we will never become the wounded ruler that we're supposed to become. The way to raise consciousness is through, in this person's chart, the Leo ascendant. So perhaps taking risks, getting out there, really owning their pride if we're looking at from a striptease point of view. Here's their black moon. It's in Cancer. So perhaps part of the issue here will be to work with the family, the children, in a group space, or help people, let's just say in one way, heal childhood wounds or trauma. And Chiron is in Taurus. So there is a big self-worth issue. It's going to be linked to money. And so money, time, financial resources will be pilfered to try to cover up the wound, or a lot of focus on the material, and perhaps even travel, spend a lot of unnecessary money traveling, 9th house, to cover up that wound that we see here in Mars in Aquarius in the 6th, which can lead to some health issues. So maybe it's his day-to-day work. Mars in the 6th is where he's constantly trying to be different and unique with that Aquarius. So we really want to start to see where we have Chiron and Black Moon. It tend to be 2 wounded spots in our psyche. I want to cover up my Chiron sign and house by doing more or covering up that wound. That means that we end up hating ourselves, and we take it out in a Lilith way by sign and by house. So maybe he spends all this time traveling or spending money on teachers. Let's say this is a perfect person who's prime to get involved with, let's say, a guru or spiritual teacher who's going to promise him riches. But here now he takes it away from the family because the self-hatred has to kick in at a low vibration. But if we really learn to spiritual adult, we're going to really learn that the Chiron and the Black Moon are the antidote to the child low vibration, moon and sun. Thank you.